All right, continuing with assignment 3. This was the first historical kind of portrait I wanted to match. And I had that in mind when my family and myself, we were at the Grand Canyon, but I didn't have it in front of me to reference. And I especially like this exposure of my 6-year-old. But you can notice right away, especially if you look at my sketches, that there's some issues with this, right? Just with the formatting. He's way too low down. But what I like is that his head is lined up with the horizon, much like this. And you have these strong kind of focal points on each side. So I think this has the potential, even better potential than the ones where I match the composition a little bit better, because you see how the head is not at all with the horizon line. And I just look terrible in shorts, so I'd rather do this one. But like most portrait photos we see in the culture today, if you look at a magazine cover, these photos are not just one photo. They come from a photo shoot with lots of different versions, and then they composite the final cover with an arm from one photo, a hip from another, the lips from another. It's this crazy mix match to try to match some sort of ideal. And I can do that with this. I can actually use my other exposures from that photo shoot, like these rocks and everything, and build them into this to match the formatting I want. So I'll get to that in a little bit. The problem is this is mostly about the setting and the context and the scale shift. But it matches the focus pretty well, and it matches at least the theory of the composition well, and the natural textures. And of course, you can't reproduce this with artificial light. So this is just showing the natural light, and it's worth doing. I will probably have to burn him down a little bit so he looks more backlit, and I'll have to dodge the background to make it a little bit brighter. But I'll get to all of that. But because it doesn't match the typical portrait, I'm going to start with something a little bit more familiar and a little bit more extreme. And going back to our very first exercise where we took a portrait of ourselves and we matched it to an ideal that we liked in photography, and then we did a double exposure where we kind of blended the two together. I'm instead going to take my raw exposure here, and I'm going to try to process it just to show you how extreme it can get to match Andres Serrano's female bust photo here. And because it just requires taking away focus and color processing and the formatting that it adds, I should be able to match. I can get something kind of close. But you'll notice actually the lighting is very similar. The side lighting here going into the core shadow, the shadow around the eye. It's what I have here. I'm just facing the wrong direction. So the first thing, I need to do the basic formatting. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate my original exposure so we never mess it up. But then I'm going to select it all by going select all, select this whole layer. Then I'm going to transform it, Command T, or edit, transform, and then flip it horizontally. So I'm flipping the negative. Woo! Right. And this is what it looks like when I look in the mirror, because I'm always used to a reversed image. But that matches the lighting direction of this. And it actually matches it not terribly, right? So if I'm doing my lighting sketch, I'll notice that her forehead's a little bit lighter, so I'm going to lighten my forehead. Her cheek is a little bit lighter, I'm going to lighten this cheek. And her chest is darker, I'm going to be burning this down a bit. Of course, I'm in a dark shirt, so that might take care of itself. But formatting issues come before all of those lighting issues. This is in much more of a square shape. So what can I do? I didn't shoot enough. I don't have enough space. But I'm going to be replacing the background anyway. So if that's the case with yours, we can grow more space around our photo. And we do that by going to Image Canvas Size and just increasing our inches. So let me go way too big. Let me go 16 by 18 inches with an extension color of white. Right? And now I want to match this formatting. So let me put this into the corner. Shrink it down just so I can reference it off to the side. So how much space is there above her head versus how much space I have? That will be about right. And then how much space below? It's serviceable. And then how much space side to side? I thought I was overshooting it, but this is actually looking okay. It's maybe a little bit less space here. So now I go to my crop tool, and I can check my edges and just crop it in a little bit to tighten it up. Okay, how can I double check? Well, if I open this image up in Photoshop, I can use crop to show me, there it was. So if I open the image I'm trying to match up in Photoshop, remember we did this with our sketches, but I can use the cropping tool to show me the third lines. And I can do that with my image as well. So here are the third lines for mine. My eyes are below it. It's not really following the rule of thirds. Whereas this image, it is closer to following the rule of thirds. So I need to bring my eye line down. Come on. All right, finally. Okay, I need to bring this down so that it's on my eye line or close to it. And because you can't have two crops going on at the same time, you can do a quick screen grab of it with the third lines there. And then you don't need to have it open in Photoshop anymore. So I'll use my screen grab, and now I'm going to try to match that positioning. So the first thing, the first formal element we have to control in this project to match, and if we can't get it right, we just have to get new exposures, is the format. And we do, the only tool we have for that is cropping. So put it about there. The shoulder, that looks pretty good. I don't have quite enough shoulder. Might have to make that up. Would break off here, go to the bottom. That spacing looks good. That spacing looks pretty good, though my hair isn't quite as poofy. All right, so that is my formatting. That's step one. Now, the next thing we sketched was lighting, right? And if I squint, you see how flat this is. So I want to replace this background lighting. And what I'm going to do to replace, this is pretty extreme, But first I'm just going to take my exposure and I'm going to do a general adjustment just to brighten the midtones a little bit, to bring a little bit more value into there, because it's a balanced exposure. There's lots of content that I can bring out without losing texture. I don't think I need to make my shadows that much darker yet. Okay. But now I'm going to, if I want to make a duplicate of that, I'm going to select just inside of my foreground layer. So just inside my head. And I'm going to hide my guides so that they don't affect the selection. And remember, you can alter your selection by holding down Option to cut away from it, or holding down Shift to add to it. I'm just using my tablet so I can draw a little bit more effectively, and my lasso tool. Then I'm going to cut myself off a little bit like hers and give myself a rounded shoulder. Whoops. Like so. And then I need to cut this part away. Now the reason I went inside my borders is because now I'm going to replace the background. And I want to make sure I get more than I need so I can separate the foreground and the background. So the way I do this is I don't want to duplicate what's inside my selection. I want to duplicate everything that's outside my selection. And I do that by going to Select, Inverse. And that inverts my selection, so now it's everything on the outside. And now I can hit Command J, but I want to do it from the background layer. And now I want to move that layer up to the top. Okay, that looks really weird, but don't worry. What it really is just a cutout of the background for me. I'm going to duplicate that again, and I'm now going to fill it with a gradation that matches this photo. And if you want a flat color, you can do it in the same way. So I use the gradient tool here, but if I want to do it flat, I would use the paint bucket tool. And then I select a color. So let's say just yellow, but an orangey yellow. And now I'm just going to paint it all in. Okay. But I want all of it, so I'm going to say Edit, Fill, the entire thing with my foreground color. Now why did I make a duplicate? That way I can select with the magic wand this empty space perfectly, and then cut that selection out from this background layer. Now that it's easy to select, I can also paint it with a gradient. But let's just see what that would look like really quick. So there I am. Just a rough background replacement with more space, with more than I need, so I can erase away for my ears and everything on different layers. Now to match these colors exactly, this is really cool. If I open up that image in Photoshop again, I can steal the colors directly from the image. Now hopefully you don't need to replace your image, your background completely. But if you do, it's a good power to have as a photographer. But in this, there's no way I could get that shot without, processing heavily the background or suspending it in liquid and doing the kind of things that Andres Serrano did. All right, so what I do is I use now the gradient fill tool. And I don't need to worry about cutting it out. So I'm just going to use the gradient tool, which is under the paint bucket. And I'm going to choose a color gradation between two colors.